you're still running on-prem or struggling with legacy systems, today's podcast will bring a grounded perspective on what it actually takes to move to the cloud or cloud-based SaaS, and what's at stake if you don't. We talk about the real-world blockers to SaaS adoption, what's changed in cloud security, how to approach proof of concepts the right way, and how modern infrastructure can be a true business enabler. But before we begin, I want to tell you about today's podcast sponsor, Suite by Monitor. Suite by Monitor has the data, research, insights, and information to power better business decisions. There's no content resource for equipment finance leaders of all levels that can make this kind of weekly impact on your business and in your career. You can join Suite today for only $150 a year or $15 a month, or get your whole team subscribed at a discounted rate that delivers next level value. Visit suitebymonitor.com to learn more. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Rita Garwood, Editor-in-Chief of Monitor. Joining me on the podcast today is Alex Barnes. Alex is Director of Cloud Hosting at Alfa. Alex, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Rita. Great to be here.
So let's just start off with your background. What led you into cloud infrastructure and how has your role evolved at Alfa?
Yes, of course. So I've been working at Alfa now for 16 years and started out as a software engineer working on our version 5 Java platform evolution. This was all back in 2011. This was when the cloud as we know it today was really just getting started. So I was interested in the early platform as a service offerings and was a beta tester of the Cloud Foundry private cloud product. And this was where I first proved that Alpha Systems version 5 was already architected to run on this type of cloud platform, almost without modification. So from there, I kind of worked with our sales team to demo Alpha Systems running on AWS platform as a service, Elastic Beanstalk, which was one of their very early services. From there, I kind of changed tack and then spent many years helping customers in the US to run Alpha systems on premises, and was able to see how cloud deployments were eventually going to really change the way organizations deployed and run their applications. So then in 2017, I was given the opportunity to lead the development of the Alpha Cloud Service, which is Alpha's single tenant software as a service platform for running our product. And this allowed me to put into practice everything that we as a company had learned from supporting our on-premise customers and kind of combine this with my long-standing interest in cloud-based services. So in my role today, I'm still very deeply involved in the way that we use cloud services at Alpha, but I'm a lot less involved in the software development and architecture side of what we do. So I'm still maintaining that kind of long-standing cloud interest, if you like.
So from when you started at Alpha, cloud has come a long way and cloud adoption has come a long way, but many finance providers are still running critical platforms themselves on premises or in managed data centers. Why do you think that is?
You're absolutely right when you say that it's come a long way. I mean, every company and customer we talk to has a cloud strategy now. But as you rightly point out, that doesn't necessarily mean that change has actually happened. So I think the reality is that many old school and critical applications like we see in our industry aren't well suited to running on modern infrastructures in a cloud environment, since they just weren't designed with that kind of deployment model in mind. And I guess, just as a side, by cloud environment, I typically refer to a setting where resources like servers are short-lived and typically applications run inside containers. Just because I'll probably refer to that again in future. I think there can also be a belief that on-premises deployments are inherently more secure than those running in the cloud, and that administrators retain more control. So whilst this might have been true historically, cloud platforms today are making it much easier to do the right thing from a security standpoint, right off the bat. And they also provide a shared responsibility model where they take responsibility for the security of the underlying cloud infrastructure. And this this kind of responsibility is a significant burden on companies. So, I mean, that's a big positive for the cloud argument. And I think on top of that, organizations often just don't have the resources to move critical workloads to the cloud, even if they want to, and they've identified clear advantages from doing so. This type of project can just become, deprioritized when you're talking about resilience or availability that isn't impacted very often. You might end up deprioritizing that change against something that has a more direct customer facing impact. And so, despite the will and the planning being there, it just isn't happening.
So do you see the same considerations impacting adoption of cloud-based software as a service platforms such as Alpha Cloud?
So it can certainly sound big and scary, but when we talk to our customers about moving an existing Alpha installation to our cloud platform, we're typically starting from the exact same version, which makes a lift and shift approach of our customers' data and integrations straightforward, while instantly giving them the benefits and advantages of a SaaS approach to application management. I think trust is also very important here. So it's critical that SaaS vendors work hard to gain and then retain the trust of their customers, since they are putting significant trust in them to keep their data secure and their service available. So comprehensive audit programs with participation in cloud programs such as Amazon Well Architected go a long way towards kind of gaining that trust in our experience. And the other side, the other topic we see a lot now is the European Union's Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, which has forced a step change in the way that SaaS vendors and their customers work together to verify resilience, and not just in the UK, but globally. So it's no longer enough to say that everything must be fine. Our customers are increasingly expecting us to provide innovative solutions to ensure that their business would survive a major impact, and also to be very transparent around the way our service is operated.
So in your experience, what are the biggest misconceptions or fears that hold organizations back from moving to the cloud or to cloud-based SaaS platforms?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, and one that we talk about a lot at Alpha. I think the biggest fears that we hear of are the loss of control, the security concerns, and then on top of that, just the overall cost implications of cloud and SaaS. On top of this, as I was just saying, SaaS platforms require a shift in thinking around monitoring and responsibilities, which again is very much tied into concerns about loss of control and trust. So I think I wouldn't necessarily say that any of these are kind of misconceptions, since we know that it's our job at Alpha to help customers to understand how these concerns will impact them, and to help them to make the right decision around systems for their businesses and needs. And so all of these fears, I think, need to be mitigated by having the right organizational structures in place to ensure that they don't come to be. And that means, for example, having a team who understand how to configure a cloud platform to meet security requirements. And for self-managed workloads, a cloud FinOps team, so this is financial operations, to ensure that teams are getting the most from their cloud spend and budgeting. But that only applies for self-managed cloud workloads. On the software as a service side, there are major simplification benefits for companies, but those fears remain centered around putting trust in an external vendor. They have to be sure their data is secure, their system remains available, and that the response to issues matches their expectations. And as I say, transparency and track record are important, since contracts are also important, but only go so far. And then, just also in terms of those fears, having the right application support and monitoring teams in place for both self-managed and critical SaaS platforms is important, and understanding boundary of responsibilities and how that changes as you move to the cloud for all the teams involved.
So can you talk a bit about tenancy models in SaaS? What are the benefits of multi versus single tenancy, especially for critical platforms in heavily regulated industries?
Yes, of course. So when we think about software as a service, we're often thinking about these multi-tenant products where many customers are sharing a single endpoint and therefore the underlying infrastructure, but they're authorized to view only the data that applies to their user or organization. And typically that segmentation of data must be implemented in the products themselves. So new features or changes made to that platform must ensure that that segmentation is part of every development. You just can't get that wrong when you're running this kind of platform. And I think this is a great model for less critical products, typically with smaller volumes of data, and where consistent performance at scale is less important. But what this model doesn't offer is the security, data residency, or performance guarantees that are required for critical platforms such as servicing or originations in these regulated industries. And we always think about, the impact of a security breach or availability issue on such a critical platform. And that could be from a sophisticated attack, or it might just be from, and more likely, from a simple coding error. In a single tenant platform, an issue might only impact one environment and wouldn't impact any other tenants. Conversely, if you're talking about a multi-tenant platform, some kind of issue of that type is going to impact a lot of customers all at the same time. And we've seen this in various kind of very well publicized issues over the years. And it makes problems much harder to resolve and leads to, bad outcomes for everyone involved. I think on the flip side, though, the biggest benefit you get from multi-tenant SaaS arises from having one large and highly elastic environment. So if every tenant's using the same infrastructure, the teams who run it have to do less patching, less maintenance, and these companies may be able to offer a lower value service with fewer guarantees about performance and isolation. So this is something I've written about previously on our engineering blog at Alfa, and specifically how we went about taking some of the techniques that are used for multi-tenant infrastructure management, but applying them to the single tenant model, which allows us to offer all those benefits of single tenancy, but whilst kind of keeping the overhead and the maintenance and the diversity of infrastructure contained, if that makes sense.
It does. So for industries that are under heavy regulation, like equipment finance, how does compliance shape the cloud conversation?
So from a cloud perspective, I think the major cloud platforms actually allow compliance requirements to be met through configuration. And that's in a way that might not be possible for a more traditional on-premise data center deployment where the capabilities are fixed and they're not necessarily evolving. Now, that does require that you have the right expertise and the right organization-wide engagement. But I think it improves the opportunities and it makes it a lot easier to evolve as regulations evolve, which as we see that's happening, at an increasing rate. And from a cloud-based software as a service perspective, our customers are actually often implementing Alfa systems using Alfa Cloud to ensure that they are meeting these rapidly evolving compliance requirements through features like business rules, workflow, etc. And those regulations are still evolving quickly, and regulatory bodies are moving to force companies to be more engaged in the underlying capabilities of outsourced cloud services, certainly from a resilience standpoint, as I mentioned about the DORA legislation, for example. And that's having a big impact on the provisioning of software as a service platforms, but also on the usage of cloud platforms as well.
So some businesses might say our systems are too customized to move. How do you approach clients who feel locked into their legacy architecture?
So this is certainly something that we come across a lot, since we're typically working with customers who are replacing a legacy platform when they implement Alpha systems. So in general, a system which is locked into that legacy architecture is just going to cause more and more drag on future innovation. So as difficult as it might be, there actually is no better time to address these challenges than the present, as hard as that might be. And for highly custom in-house legacy architectures where there is no opportunity to move to a SaaS deployment model, I think I would say that the key preparation for a cloud move would be assessing how those existing applications can be isolated and decoupled from supporting services such as databases and messaging. So even if they really can't move to the cloud, or it's just not something that's going to happen in the near future, I think looking at those kind of opportunities for abstraction, isolation, and decoupling of those applications will have a positive impact on the deployment of those in the data center. So it's a positive step that organizations can take in which moves them in the right direction.
So teams who are responsible for self-managed installations often say things like, if something breaks, I can fix it myself. How does that mindset evolve in a SaaS first model?
So firstly, it's a good customer-focused mindset, and the advantage of an open, configurable software as a service platform is that it encourages that mindset to be maintained. So ultimately, by streamlining all of the deployments to be done the same way, they're less likely to go wrong in the first place, which means that kind of customer-focused mindset can be kind of focused on other business opportunities. And leveraging companies with specialist software as a service skills will often translate to better support outcomes anyway. Certainly, we've found that giving our support teams consistent and high quality information powered by comprehensive monitoring and an iterative approach to improvement has translated to fewer support issues and faster resolution times for support tickets. And customers gain the benefits of the herd where deployment architecture is fully standardized, as issues experienced by one customer are fixed there and fixed once for all customers. The reality in our experience is that the individual nature of self-managed installations overall makes support harder for all the teams involved, and doesn't necessarily result in better outcomes at all.
So in finance, downtime means lost revenue. Can you walk us through how Alpha's Data Guardian helps clients reduce that risk?
Yeah, so the reality is that downtime is generally caused by a confluence of small but unexpected factors rather than something dramatic like a major cloud provider outage or sophisticated attack, although of course they can happen. So with this in mind, we've built Alpha Cloud with intra-region high availability across all of our components to ensure continuous operation uh, and automated resiliency for the most common failure scenarios. But on top of that, we've also worked on a range of options for disaster recovery to cover these more serious scenarios. And the key to resilience is being able to recover from the unexpected. And this is where our core value, resilient to the unknown, and data guardian comes in. So by storing customer backups across multiple isolated regions and cloud platforms, and deploying infrastructure automatically without any ClickOps, we know and regularly prove through our tests that if necessary, we could actually rebuild a customer's complete production infrastructure in a clean account in a matter of hours. And for the more likely scenarios, we can rely on our runbooks and global team of experts to recover from the unexpected.
That's great. So for organizations that are cloud curious but hesitant, what is the right first step for them to take?
We work with our customers on this quite often. So at Alpha, based on our experience, the key is to set up simple, low impact proof of concept exercises using non-production systems. So these proof of concept exercises would typically run for a fixed period of time and have a clearly defined scope and success criteria, which includes the cost benefit analysis of moving that workload to the cloud. And at the end of that period, the infrastructure can simply be destroyed, which is one of the big benefits of using the cloud in the first place. And we can then take a step back and assess the outcomes of the exercise against those criteria that we laid down. And we use the same principles when we talk to our self-managed customers about Alpha Cloud. There really is very little risk to a small-scale proof of concept, which has that fixed length and scope. It's also important to identify workloads and in the interest of balance, which will not benefit from moving to the cloud. And these are typically batch-style systems performing a set number of rigid business processes, which requires a fixed and well-understood capacity and perhaps doesn't need wider connectivity. So these don't benefit from the cloud-based deployment model. And so the value proposition to run them on this fully managed cloud platform might not even make sense. And that is a system by system and organization by organization decision. It's certainly the cloud is certainly not the right answer for every workload that there is.
So beyond the technical move, what cultural or organizational shifts are necessary for a successful cloud transition? And is SaaS a better approach for many organizations? You just said that it might not be right for all, but is it right for most, in your opinion?
I think so. I think what we see today is the vast majority of workloads and systems would benefit from all of the kind of benefits offered by the cloud platforms, the elasticity, the security, the flexibility, and of course the ever-evolving feature set which they offer. I think one of the biggest shifts for companies building their own cloud solutions rather than using SaaS is the requirement for teams to be aware of the way that their infrastructure or their usage of infrastructure has a very real impact on the invoice that they will receive each month. And this is probably a new challenge for lots of companies who are used to purchasing servers and installing them in data centers for their entire useful life. So organizations running these cloud workloads will need to start to talk about cloud FinOps. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. This practice combines finance and DevOps to focus on optimizing cloud spending and maximizing the business value that you actually get from the cloud resources you're running. There are often, many small and unpredictable charges which come from creating and operating cloud resources. Data egress fees are the one we hear about most often.
Mhm.
Cost management is generally less of a concern for SaaS products since they'll generally have a fixed subscription fee for a given usage level, for example, the number of environments you're using. However, I think generally companies will need to look for a balance of the two. They'll likely have their own engineering teams who'll be looking for opportunities to innovate, especially in the directly customer-facing space. And they'll need these guardrails to ensure that they don't hinder their innovation, but do stick to their budgeted spends. And alongside this, there'll be any number of SaaS products running within that organization which perform very specific functions and, as I say, have very fixed subscription costs.
So what are the signs that a company is ready to make the move or is even overdue to shift into cloud or SaaS?
So I think the main indicator that a move is overdue is that the platform and even perhaps the applications running on the platform are starting to impact both compliance and also innovation. So when organizations aren't able to pivot quickly or respond to the unexpected, they will lose out on opportunities. And as platforms age, it becomes harder and harder to support them. And an ever increasing percentage of, IT budgets are used to keep these platforms running, which compounds the effect of taking resources away from innovation and opportunities. So I think it's important to identify these sources of drag before they become a major problem and to assess the best way to improve upon them. So as we've said here, this might be a replatform to the cloud. It might be a complete system replacement, perhaps with a SaaS-based cloud offering, or it could even just be an internal re-architecture, retaining an on-premises infrastructure for some workloads, at least in the short term, but taking steps to improve the deployment, and reduce the drag as much as possible within the confines of that deployment architecture.
So, without naming names, can you share an example of a company that made the shift and the impact that it had on their operations or on their resilience?
So I think when looking at our list of customers, we're often talking about a shift to cloud-based SaaS. So
Mhm.
that's either from a legacy platform or perhaps from a self-managed installation of our software. So that's kind of my frame of reference. So where customers have moved from self-managed and on-premises installations of Alfa systems to Alfa systems running in Alfa Cloud, we've seen significant improvements in performance, so batch performance of the system. But also we've seen significant improvements in issue resolution times. And I spoke a little bit earlier about kind of why we thought that was happening. And those improvements have real world implications for their users and for their customers. And they typically come about because of the better performance of modern cloud infrastructure and for issue resolution, simply because the vendor of an application is generally the best place to provide the support for running it because they have that deep understanding of how it works and they can resolve an issue once across all of their customer base. I think the resilience argument is also very compelling. So on-premises installations typically, and I saw this a lot during my years helping customers to run Alfa systems in their own data centers. They typically have a primary and a secondary data center, which would provide an active passive failover capability. These were not tested very often, and you have to imagine that they would almost certainly result in a degraded performance if that failover were ever used. So cloud platforms such as Amazon make it possible for technology teams to deploy well-designed applications across multiple data centers in an active-active configuration, and where both data centers are actually servicing users and customers during normal operation. So that is a huge shift in the very basic elements of deployment across resilient data centers.
Mm. So, conversely, have you seen companies suffer because they waited too long to modernize?
Yes, I mean, certainly we live in an uncertain world, and in the last few years we've seen increased conflict, COVID, high inflation, and changing political landscapes. And modern systems need to be inherently better at dealing with uncertainty, and deploying these systems to secure and elastic cloud platforms gives companies more flexibility to meet these challenges. We've certainly seen examples of our customers stuck on legacy systems who were unable to rise to meet the needs of their customers during challenging times. And as a result, customer satisfaction suffered. Conversely, other customers who are using modern cloud native applications with flexible APIs running on these cloud platforms have been able to quickly roll out new tools and features and approaches to help their customers when they need it most. And I think we see that customers remember these types of timely digital solutions, and our clients are able to grow their businesses very quickly during these times without having to worry about the platform or the underlying infrastructure.
That's great. So, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to any IT leader who is still debating the cloud and cloud-based SaaS?
So I'd say the most important piece of advice is to ensure that when assessing the movement of any individual application or workload or adopting the cloud in general, that you have a clear set of success criteria for the move and that you've engaged the right people and have the right plan to assess the outcomes of that re-platform opportunity against those criteria on an ongoing basis. I think, as with any platform, continuous assessment is still needed. And by using containerized applications, you can make it easier to switch cloud providers in the future if that became necessary, or even to move back to self-managed platforms if the cost benefit was no longer there for using the cloud to run that specific workload.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Alex, and for, sharing all of your insight into, the cloud and cloud-based SaaS. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thanks, Rita. I really appreciate this. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. Thanks so much.